Hi, my name is Chapiro, and this is my presentation on the correlation between the Hope Scholarship GPA and students' futures. I'm going to be basing my research on the research question, how effective is the Hope Scholarship GPA cutoff in determining the future success of students above and below the standard? So, why the Hope Scholarship? I chose the Hope Scholarship as it's a unique scholarship. It's funded by the Georgia lottery system, and it's a merit-based scholarship that determines a 3.0 cutoff, allowing me to clearly differentiate between students that are above and below this standard. I established a research gap as there's limited yet present information about students' GPAs and that correlation between that and their futures. However, there is no research on hope reception and these students' GPAs and that correlation with their futures. The current research is a University of Miami study where they found that students with a 1-point GPA higher than their counterparts will have a 13% increase in their future incomes. I'm going to be defining students' futures in my research as the amount of internship and employment opportunities they receive and their projected career earnings based on their future career paths. I hypothesize based on all this that students with a 0.3 GPA difference or higher will have a much more or much less successful future following than their counterparts. However, students with a 0.1 GPA around each other will have very similar futures. I based this off of the University of Miami study, which found that a higher GPA will have a higher income. So I believe that students with a much higher GPA will have a much better future. I thought it was necessary to look at the development of the scholarship. So Governor Zell Miller started the scholarship in the 1990s with a threefold purpose. His purpose was to increase the amount of top students that attend in-state tuition institutions. He wanted to address economic and racial discrepancies, and he wanted to improve education in high school and college as a whole. He was unable to address the economic problems with college education because the GSFC found that at the beginning of when the scholarship was just instated, there was $21 million given to students, and now in 2024, there was $841 million given to students, showing the development of the scholarship itself. Next, I wanted to look at the external influence on students' GPAs. I found that one of them is income, shown in Richard Budden's graph, where you can see in the top blue and the top red bars that students with a much lower income will have a much lower GPA, and the students with a higher income will have a higher GPA, showing how it affects students' GPAs. Along with this, personality traits affect students' GPAs. In Nurcan Alkas's study, she found that students who are conscientious, motivated, and agreeable tend to have much higher GPAs. And finally, race and ethnicity can affect students' GPAs, shown in the Georgia Budget and Policy Institution's study, where they found that 64% of Hope Scholarship recipients are white, showing the problems that are with the Hope Scholarship and how white dominated it is. Next, I wanted to see how the Hope Scholarship affects things outside of students, outside of GPAs. So you can see that the retention rates of students is affected, as only 2 years into the statement of the Hope Scholarship, Daniel Bugler found that students' retention rates were up 70%. Despite students tending to lose hope, they still will remain in college at a 70% higher rate. Next, tuition prices are much more expensive, shown in Josh Robinson's study, where he found through 5 years, the University of Georgia's tuition went up 65%. And this is also emphasized through the Bennett hypothesis, where he found that when scholarships or loans are given to students, then institutions will tend to make their tuition prices much more expensive. Along with this, pre-college education was clearly developed, as Gary Henry found that there's an increase in the amount of Hope recipients which can only be shown by high school education increasing as more students will reach the 3.0 standard. Finally, I looked at the correlation between GPA and future opportunities. I found again that a higher GPA will lead to a higher income in the University of Miami study. And next, I found that personality traits can also lead to higher employment opportunities. This comes from Kendra Cherry's study, where she found that employers tend to hire people with 5 main personality traits, and 3 of them are conscientiousness, motivation, and agreeability. So these students that will have a higher GPA that have these personality traits will also have a higher internship and employment opportunities, showing the correlation between these 2 factors. For my method, I made a correlational study, and I found the correlation between the different variables. I implemented a survey that I distributed to the students, and I found correlational coefficients and different statistical values through a specific database. The survey that I asked specific questions like, did you receive the Hope Scholarship? How many internship and employment opportunities did you receive? What's your future income based off your career path? And what was your high school GPA? And I took these results and I put them into a database where I found the correlational coefficient Pearson's R, which is used to find the correlation again between different variables, and I used it to find the correlation between GPA and their futures, which is their internship and employment opportunities or their future incomes. Through this, I had a 90-day survey where I had 51 responses, and I created these 3 histograms, one for GPA, one for internship and employment opportunities, and one for the future income of students. I found the means, the standard deviations, and the correlational coefficients with these. The mean is the average value of these, and the standard deviation is the average distance each point is from that mean, basically the variance of the data. For my GPA histogram, I found a mean of 3.393 and a standard deviation of 0.424, shown as a lot of the data is heavily around where 3.4 is. In the internship and employment opportunities histogram, I had a mean of 2.048 and a standard deviation of 1.964. This is presented in the heavy skewing to the left. And then finally, for my future income histogram, I had a mean of around $81,000 a year and a standard deviation of $31,238. And this is shown again through the slight skew to the left. My first scatter plot that I developed was between GPA and internship and employment opportunities. I found the connection between these and the correlational coefficient was Pearson's R of 0.065, and you can see the R squared in the top right of 0.0042. This means that 0.42% of the variance displayed in this scatter plot, the 0.42% of the variance between these 2 variables is shown in this scatter plot. This means that external influences are a very prevalent factor, especially on these 2 variables, causing the low correlation that is shown in the low Pearson's R. And this disproves a previous connection found through Nurcan Alkis and Kendra Cherry's studies, where she found that, where I found the connection that students with a higher GPA will have more internship and employment opportunities. My next scatter plot that I developed was looking at GPA versus the future income of students. I found a Pearson's R of 0.173 and a R squared value of 0.0301. This means that 3% of the variance between these 2 variables was presented in this scatter plot. This once again shows the prevalence of the external influences on these 2 variables and how that affects the low correlation that was caused from the low Pearson's R value. So there's a very low correlation between these 2. This again disproves a previous connection that I found through the University of Miami study, where they found that higher GPAs lead to higher income for students in their futures. However, based on my results, this is untrue and there is no correlation between these values. Clearly, obviously with my study, there will be limitations. And to start, one of the limitations was a lack of conclusions on the cause of findings, and another one was the oversimplification of data. Since this was a correlational study, a lack of conclusion on the cause of findings had to be shown, as it only finds the correlation between variables rather than the causation. And this limited my ability to find the connection and to find the true connection between the variables rather than just a statistical correlation. My next one was an oversimplification of data. This comes from the study being quantitative study, as quantitative data typically oversimplifies complex situations, and this could have been caused by the prevalence of certain external factors that I was unable to highlight and unable to isolate. The implications of my study come from are that external factors are very prevalent and affect students' GPAs, future incomes, and the amount of internship and employment opportunities they receive. And this shows that, and my results show that there is a flawed there's a flawed system with merit-based scholarships, as they use GPA as a measure of academic success. And I'm gonna get into that a little further. In conclusion, my hypothesis was disproven due to the low correlation, and actually no correlation, between GPA and the certain variables that I found. And this shows a new understanding that the Hope Scholarship GPA cutoff does a bad job of determining future successes, as there was no correlation between GPA and income and internship and employment opportunities. So there was no correlation between GPA and students' futures. For future research, I recommend that researchers look into the causation rather than the correlation on these variables to highlight what external factors are most prevalent. After this, they should use that data to isolate the variables and eliminate these external factors. And with all that research, they should use it to develop scholarships and try to find a better way of making merit-based scholarships rather than using GPA as a device of academic measures. They should find another way to find more academically inclined students. And these are my sources.
How did your review of the methods used by scholars in the field inform your selection of a research method that is aligned with your research question and project goal?
By following Nurcan Alkas's study, she performed a correlational study, and she was studying college students, which is exactly what I was doing. So by her using a correlational study, I saw how effective she was and how she got really good results. So I could use that study and look at the method that she used to create my method and to accurately find the correlation between my variables.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. What are the real-world implications or consequences related to your findings?
Through my findings, I found that there's a low correlation between high school GPA and their students' futures. So people can use this information to, again, develop the scholarships, the current merit-based scholarships across the nation, and get more academically inclined students. And they can use things other than GPA as a measure of academic success.
What was the most important research skill you developed as a result of this process, and how might you apply it to your future endeavors?
The most important skill that I found through my research was the ability to analyze data and the ability to review a survey and look at sources accurately. By looking at sources accurately, I can use that in future endeavors because in many of the classes and my future, I'm going to be looking at a lot of sources and having to review a lot of things. So by taking this class and doing this research, I learned how I can find the most important parts of certain studies and use that in future endeavors.